Welcome, everyone. This is Brian Franco here. Thanks for joining. It's 12:02, so we're going to allow folks to, roll in, but I see a lot of you are already here. Thanks for joining this event. We have a lot to go over in a half-hour time. We have these monthly events for our Empire Builder members, who some of you are members of the community. Thank you for being here and coming back. And some of you, so once a quarter, what we do is we open this up for free to those of you that want to explore and learn more about what we talk about and how we ultimately prepare you for the inevitable exit. And a lot of the concepts of what we talk about in these webinars derive from the book that I wrote. And I wrote this book directed to and for founders and owners of companies, teaching them, how to prepare themselves for that inevitable exit. And for all of those that say, I'm never going to exit, yes, you will. And I challenge you, because you're either going to exit internally to family, to leadership, maybe an ESOP, or externally to a third party that is looking for companies just like you. And I was on a call today with a company. They do about they did $85 million of revenue last year. They're approaching $100 million in revenue this year. And he's in a position where he wasn't even aware of how much interest was out there for his company. And he's very excited about that. We're excited for him. But we are all inevitably going to exit our companies one way or another. And that's why I wrote that book. So joining me is my COO, Daniel Robowski. We're going to give you a couple of really, I don't want to say different perspectives, because it's all themed within the same concept. But he's our COO of Meritage Partners. And he's going to talk to you from his perspective of SOPs and organization and leadership and continuation of leadership. So stay tuned. But Daniel, if you want to say hi, and then I'll prep myself to get ready here.
Got it. Well, thank you everybody for coming. As Brian said, we're gonna go over some really cool stuff with you guys. And the thing that I want everybody to take away from this call, and any call that you guys attend with us on it, is that we want to be very sure that we're not just talking in concepts all the time, right? Because that's a lot of what communities and some coaches and masterminds and all that stuff do. And we try to make sure that we're framing this around the things that we have actually experienced that cause issues or help people get across certain speed bumps that they may have within their company. So these quarterly ones are great, because we get some folks in that aren't part of the community that we can still convey some good information out to you, and talk about the stuff that is actually applicable to their business, and show them that even though they might not be wanting to sell their business, that even pushing in that direction makes it a healthy business, because a sellable business is healthy, right? It's transferable, and that's what we want to create, regardless of what the intent is. Because to Brian's point, inevitably you will exit, whether that's by your own choice or somebody else's. So
that's right. And that's why we themed and titled this webinar, The Hidden Risks That Destroy Enterprise Value. So for those of you that are saying to yourself, what's enterprise value? Well, it's a fancy way of saying, what's the valuation or what of your company, or what is your company worth? And so we're gonna dive into that over the next 24 minutes. But again, like Daniel said, we want to give you actionable advice and something really meaningful to take away from this, and give you some quick wins of what we see as low-hanging fruit of tweaks that you can make inside your company. And so I really want to encourage you to stay tuned throughout this event. At the end of this event, we're going to bring Nick Pond out on stage when Daniel and I exit stage, and he'll talk to you about how you could formally join the community, what that looks like. And Audrey, who's sitting in the background here, she manages a lot of these events that we do, both virtual and in person. So she'll be able to give you some information, a link to book a call with Nick Pond with our firm, and he could tell you more about the details of joining. So But again, welcome back. This is our free version of the event that we do once a quarter. We have a lot of existing Empire Builder members online here with us. But if this is your first time, welcome. I hope this is very fruitful for you, and we'll invite you back once a quarter to these quarterly events where we open up the doors and let you see behind the curtain of what we do here. And so let's go ahead and move forward and pull back some of the curtains around enterprise value. But before we get into it, there's a chat in your lower right-hand corner. I really like participation. It helps drive the conversation, and it helps us to really frame what you guys want to listen to, because we're here for you. So with that said, in the chat, I want you to type if you are one of the two types of either you've been through a process of selling a company, trying to sell your company. Let me know. Have you been through this process? Is it familiar to you? And that process I'm relating to is, have you ever been approached to sell your company, or someone approached you with an unsolicited offer? You have, just say yes. If you haven't, just say never. And that'll give us some good perspectives here of where everyone's at. So I'm seeing some responses. That's cool to see you guys interact and give us some feedback. So love it. All right. So those of you that have attempted this process and you've completed it, congratulations. You're likely here because you're a serial entrepreneur, or some people call them everpreneurs, where you're always going to be building and growing and doing something. For those of you that have attempted to go through a process of selling your companies and it failed, I'm going to tell you what those common deal killers are, and you might relate to some of them, or this might be news to you. But again, the goal here is to establish this evergreen framework in and around, how this works. And so diligence, or due diligence, is what they call it. So due diligence is the phase, and you've received an offer from a group. They're an investor, a buyer. They're saying, hey, be exclusive to us as we go through the financial due diligence, operational due diligence, and they go into the weeds of your company. But diligence, I'll tell you, although this is the time where they're underwriting your company, diligence almost never kills a deal in the process itself, right? For some huge or dramatic reason. It's the same handful of ordinary things that we see over and over again that really can disrupt a transaction or kill your deal. Every one of them comes back to a single buyer question, and that is, if the owner walked out tomorrow, if you're the owner, and if you walked out tomorrow, does the money keep coming? Does your business continue to run? And most of you will say, yes, of course it does. But the question is, when you eventually come back to that company a week later, a month later, 3 months later, what does it look like? And this is a true test and testament of, have you established the right leadership structure in your company? Because if you are the business and everything funnels through you, that is a massive risk to investors, because they start to ask themselves, and if you could play along with me and put your investor hat on, if we were collectively on this call going to go buy a company together, and we quickly realize that the owner of the company is part of most every major decision, we're going to be concerned with, well, what happens to the business when they leave? Or if they have favor with the relationships of their customers and clients for 5 years, 25 years, or somewhere in between, will those customers like us as much as they like the owner today? And so as they ask themselves those questions and they look for the supporting documentation to either support or dilute that risk, they really want to find out how, and it helps them dictate how do they structure the transaction. If the risk is too great, they'll walk away. If the risk is manageable, they will ultimately structure the terms of the transaction in and around that situation and that narrative. So, I talked about customer concentration. Again, you might have great relationships with these groups, but if you walk away, do they also walk away? And if they have a large piece of your revenue mix, then that's a major risk for anyone, including yourself. And especially in the instance where you're going to pass this on to the next generation of your family or your children or your management team. You need to be conscious of that because you don't want to leave them with that risk. And then, we talked about founder dependency, of course, and, we always talk about financial hygiene and having that financial readiness. Last night, I did a tour with a couple companies, but one in particular where the owner has not been physically at the business for about 5 years. He works remote, and so they have leadership in place, and they run the day-to-day of the business. But the leaders in the company, one of them is his daughter, and she's very knowledgeable of the company. It's in aerospace defense manufacturing. They do roughly mid $20 million a year of revenue. And, so one question that I asked and identified that she was a big part of that day-to-day operation. So we were concerned with, is the family selling the company so everyone leaves, or is she going to stay and remain? What we discovered is she wants to stay, she wants to remain, she loves what she does, but the father ultimately wants to de-risk his net worth because he has roughly $25 million of net worth tied in and trapped inside this company. So, we need to be able to, as we go to market, we need to be able to prove out the financial performance of the business. And let me tell you something we also noticed. They are absolutely struggling when it comes to financial reporting. So in that instance, we brought in a CPA firm to help us build out what we call the quality of earnings, and that's going to be really our tool, one of the major leveraging tools to help support the financial performance of the business. And keep in mind, I don't know how you are all tracking your financials, if you have a bookkeeper, if you have a CPA, if you're doing it, your spouse is doing it. But let me tell you from the investor standpoint, because I've sat on both sides of the table, I've acquired companies, I've built companies, I've sold companies, as we do at Meritage Partners for our clients like you. But if we as investors look at a company and there's inconsistencies in the financial reporting, we immediately discount the value of the company because we know something is wrong. We may not know where it's at, but we will discount a company by 10% right off the bat just because of the lack of financial clarity. And so your financial reports have to be ready monthly. They have to be accurate, and they cannot trigger any unnecessary questions. And so, Daniel, you follow more from an operations standpoint. Love to hear, how you have your perspective on this and share your perspective with the audience of, good data in, good data out. We all hear that, but what it really comes down to is how's your operations team interacting with that data? Because a lot of times they're producing it, right?
Yeah. Well, and you and I talk about this, I think, in every forum that we have the opportunity to talk about it, whether it's collective or independently, that the two biggest things that are going to kill a deal are financial inaccuracies and operational deficiencies, right? The thing about it is, I don't know that we've ever had a client that we shined a light on a thing that was not going well in their company, whether it was lack of documented SOPs, their books didn't reconcile, there was no actual understanding of the hierarchy. They're never surprised when we shine a light on it and we say, hey, the potential buyer doesn't like this thing, right? Whatever it is, they're never like, oh my God, I didn't even see that. They're all like, no, that makes sense, because they're already there, right? And I think a lot of times folks they look at a potential deal process in an order that's not the way that they actually run, right? So how many times do we hear somebody say, well, we'll just do this in diligence? It's like, we haven't even gone to market yet. So this is a pre-diligence conversation where we're trying to clean up a lot of those things that we know the due diligence team is going to uncover. But just simple stuff like documenting anything. I tell people, I just did an event up in Chicago on Meritage's behalf. They asked me, they said, well, what's your biggest thing to help us get over the hurdle of going to market? And I said, I don't care if every SOP you have is written on a yellow notepad on a desk. Having something is better than nothing, right? And with all the tools that are out there now, there's Scribe and Loom and everything else. It doesn't take much to put out SOPs together, because it all funnels back to what Brian was saying earlier of, can you disappear from your business for any period of time and it continue to run and operate? Because if it can't, why would we buy you if we can just hire you? If Brian is the key man in our company, he produces every bit of revenue and every decision goes through him and every client knows his face, they're not hiring Meritage, they're hiring Brian. And that doesn't work when you want to scale. If you want to have a lifestyle business, you want to quietly make a couple $100,000 a year, and that's where you're fine living, great. But if you're wanting to scale, or you're wanting to grow, or you're eventually wanting to exit, you have to start putting people in place to be able to handle those decisions on a day-to-day basis, and surrounding yourself with people who are experts in the thing that they do, right? But for whatever reason, that seems to be one of the biggest hurdles that almost every business we see, and regardless of the vertical, is they struggle to get past that part. It's, how do I delegate these things? What am I doing with them? How are we allocating risk, right? Because I want to be able to push risk out to different folks in different parts of our company. So if we have an operational issue, I want the operations team to carry that risk. If we have a financial issue, I want the financial team to carry that risk. And the more that we can reduce that risk, the more attractive you are to the potential buyer. And as Brian was saying, like, when we see certain inaccuracies or inefficiencies, he made the comment, we immediately kind of discount it by 10%. That's the multiple conversation. Like the math is the math. Your EBITDA is your EBITDA. We can maneuver and manipulate that a little bit by normalizing salaries and normalizing certain things, but that tells the story of from where you started to where you're at now. That multiplier is affected by all of these things. It is affected by, are your finances in order? It is affected by, do you have any sort of documented SOPs? What happens? And we, no kidding, had this happen last week, Brian? We always joke about what happens if you got hit by a car. We had a client who got hit by a truck and missed a meeting. And so Brian and I the guy's fine, just so we're clear, no issue. We kind of joked and said, this is our new story. Like, it's now no longer what if you get hit by a car, it's what if you legitimately get hit by a truck, because it happened. So,
and it was actually interesting because this is this case study. It's a $44 million transaction. And it was actually the investor who got hit by a truck.
Yeah.
And so we always use the analogy, like, well, what if you get hit by a truck and you can't show up to work or your business to run it? This was the first time we've seen this, but the investor actually was hit. He was on vacation. He was on e-bikes, and he literally got hit by a truck. He's going in for collarbone surgery, I think later this week. But we have
a lot of clients in home service too. What if you fall off a roof? What if you there's so many things that can happen that could prevent you from showing up to work tomorrow. And if you don't have any sort of contingency in place, or you don't have somebody that you have enough confidence in your company can step in and handle all those things that you would normally do, you're not setting yourself up to be transferable. And that's what we want to find, right?
Right. So let's look at some low-hanging fruit. And I'm not sure if all of you are tracking internally measurements that I'm going to share with you in a moment here, but I want you to. So if you have a pad and paper, if you're taking notes, whatever you're doing, I want you to jot these questions down. And whether you can answer them now or not, it's not as important as you finding the answer to these questions. So the first question Daniel and I have for you is, we want you to sit down and look at your books and records over the last 12 months. And when you look at the revenues, we want you to classify whether you're using QuickBooks or Sage or whatever tool you're using to track your financials. We want you to export a report that is going to break down your revenues by customer, like customer name. And again, Daniel will say to you, when it comes to SOPs, if you have one customer and they have different divisions, there's sub measurements of that, yes. But we want you to look at your customer concentration as a whole. And so go to your accounting system after this call, look at your reporting, and discover if there's any one customer that's over 25% of your annual revenue. And make mention and make note of that to yourself, because then the next natural question there is, how is that relationship arranged? Is it project-based work? Is it contracted work under long-term agreements or master service agreements? Ask yourself, how is that relationship structured? And a quick win for a lot of you is if you have one of those customers, even if they're 15% of your revenue, find the largest 5 customers in terms of revenue mix per year and determine whether or not those relationships could be, if they're in contract form today, then great. You're ahead of most. You're ahead of most in this process. But if they're not, what would it take for you to go back and have a meeting and conversations with these customers of yours to put your relationship into the 4 corners of a document, a contract? Can you do that? Are they willing to do that? Because ultimately that gives you supporting documentation to show, even if you have this revenue concentration, it gives you the ability to say, yes, client A or customer A is 25% of our revenue, but we've been contracting with them or working with them for the last 12 years. Today we live inside of this agreement, which goes another 12 months or 24 months or whatever the case may be. Some clients have contracts out to 5 years. But you remember, I mean, some of us, and I'm guilty of it too, early in my career, I would create verbal agreements, gentlemen's agreements, handshake deals. But those aren't verifiable. Those are in my head. They're not on or in an agreement. And so challenge yourself to look at those revenues broken down by client or customer, and challenge yourself to go back to those customers that you do not have agreements with and put those in writing. And what you'll find is that typically your clients will appreciate that, because they're going to see your commitment to them as much as you're asking for their commitment to you.
And the buyer doesn't care. The buyer doesn't care as long as you can explain it, right? Like, generally speaking, it's not a huge issue, but those questions come up in every due diligence. What is your customer concentration? Is there any one customer that has X, right? And every buyer has a different threshold for what they consider acceptable. But every single deal that we've done, that is one of the questions. In getting people to produce their client concentration is like pulling teeth sometimes. So just that is a really easy piece that people can go through. And if you know who that is, that's great, but make sure that it's documented appropriately. And there's a clear understanding of if there's consistent revenue every year coming out of it, that's going to come up in due diligence. Is there multiple projects under that same client, like Brian was saying? So it's absolutely some low hanging fruit that you guys can immediately go into your books and start figuring out, because you want to look at that from a risk perspective as well. If you have clients that are 50-60% of your business, you got to start figuring out a way to spread that out amongst other clients. And if that same 50-60% is solely based on you, well, we're compounding the problem. So now we got to figure out how to get more people involved in the sales process, or bringing in new clients, biz dev, whatever it is, and starting to disperse that client concentration across the board. But looking at it now is incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. So we have about 5 minutes left. So we're going to bring Nick to stage in just a moment to chat with you about, our longer segments. Typically, our monthly calls and webinars like this are an hour long. Once a quarter, we do this free event where we invite others in, and then we continue on. But those of you that are not members, encourage you to stay, and you can chat with Nick in a moment to learn more how you get involved and how you sign up. But before we do that, I want to leave you with one more actionable advice, and so I want you, as you're looking at these reports from a customer concentration standpoint that we talked about, I want you to just generally browse through and look at your profit and loss statements, and ask yourself the question: what you read and what you see on your P&L, your profit and loss, how accurate does that match what's inside your head? What I mean by that is, there's arrangements that you make along the way that don't necessarily get reflected in your financial statement. It could be a change order on a project. It could be Maybe the project was delayed, or maybe the project was accelerated. But do your books indicate that or not? And so the key there is make sure that what you have in your head, in your brain, is matching what you see on your books. Because if you were to give us access, or if you were to give a stranger access to your financials, which we never recommend you do, always do this under a non-disclosure agreement. But if someone were to access your financials, how much of it would they understand or not, based on what's in your head versus what's in those reports? So take those two exercises and follow through with them. They're extremely powerful, and they help ultimately increase your enterprise value. But more importantly, when you are going through this process, it keeps those items from destroying what you built and destroying your enterprise value, as we framed it. So thank you to all of you for being here and participating. We look forward to seeing you next month for those of you that sign up, and then Nick will chat with you more here in a moment. But Daniel, thank you always for being my co-pilot here in these events, and we'll bring Nick out. So if you want to learn more about how to join, how to participate, stand by, and we'll bring Nick on stage. Thank you, guys.
All right, so Nick's on his way. All right, here we go. So Audrey, I'm going to go ahead and dip out as well. Nick, you've got this from here. Can you throw the slide up with the QR code for Nick to speak over, please, Audrey? And like Brian said, thank you guys all for coming, and look forward to seeing you guys in the community.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, everyone. So I'm Nick Pond with Empire Builder and Meritage Partners, and just here to field any questions, kind of address the process of joining Empire Builder, what that looks like. As you can see on the screen, there's some QR codes to get that started. So I'm mostly just here to facilitate that process. I'm trying to see who we still got with us, but are there any questions? If you want to unmute or put in the chat. Otherwise, what we can do is just shoot out some information to all the attendees with this information. So as you can see, there's group coaching, $397 a month. That's that top QR code. There are some other options. The annual membership is obviously going to save you more. You can also join monthly as an individual member, or as a team, up to 5 people on your team, if you have a larger group that wants to participate, or other team members as part of that. So there's a few ways to join, and new drip courses are coming out. There's new courses coming out every week. We're continuing to develop the community and provide more information. Today was obviously kind of a little sample, if you will, of what the Empire Builder community is and the value that it brings for your business. Another part of that is going to be individual consultations and coaching available as well. So you can have individual direct conversations with Brian and or Daniel, depending on the situation, and how you join the community. So there's plenty of opportunity to kind of meet you where you are, and get what you're looking for out of the Empire Builder community for your business. As much as I love hearing myself talk, I'm open to questions. If anyone has any questions or thoughts or comments, feel free to put them in the chat, or click the ask a question button at the bottom. And then, of course, what we'll do is when we send out the information, I will send my link as well, if you want to book a call with me directly to kind of talk through some of these options, in addition to the different links to go directly into the Empire Builder community. Okay, well, I think we're at time. No questions from anyone. Thank you again for those that stuck around. Looking forward to hearing from more of you, and just keep an eye out for the information to schedule that call with myself, or to just go directly into the community and join. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk soon.